those of you who have already joined in, we're just going to let everyone else trickle in here, and then we'll get started in just a few moments. All right, so I think we'll get started, even though there's probably going to be a couple more people joining in. Thank you for everyone who's with us right now. My name's Kaylee. I am the client service coordinator here at CompuWorks, and I've been doing these webinars with Al for a couple months now. We're well on our way. I just want to bring everyone's attention to the upcoming events that you can find on our webinar or on our website, I'm sorry. So you can register in advance, and we do have one this Thursday. Actually, we're offering 2 webinars this month, and the one on Thursday will be Get Cyber Secure Savvy. And then we will be offering a webinar on March 22nd on OneNote. And like I said before, you can pre-register for those on our website, and we will also be sending out the email notifications. Before we get going today, just a few Zoom etiquette rules for everyone. If you have a question today, please use the Q&A button in Zoom at the bottom of your screen to bring up the dialog box where you'll enter your question. We'll be reviewing those throughout the webinar and also during the Q&A at the end of the session, and we can answer those as we go. We'll try to get through as many of the questions that come up in the allotted hour. We can stay a short while after to get to any additional questions if needed, or you can always reach out to us afterwards if something comes up. And we will follow up at the end of the webinar with a feedback survey. We do like to get your ideas for future topics, and we really appreciate your feedback to let us know if you like these sessions and what we could possibly bring to you in the future. Before our presentation begins, I'd like to introduce to you CompuWorks founding partner, Alan Bauman.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. Good to see so many familiar faces out there today, a few unfamiliar faces, which is always good. So welcome to everybody. We've got an interesting topic today, and this is the first time we've presented this particular topic, and I think it's a really, really important one. We talk a lot about cybersecurity. I know a lot of you think a lot about cybersecurity. If it's not top of your list, it should be pretty close to it these days. The risks are real and fairly terrifying. If you're pay attention to the news at all, you sort of see what happens out there. And cybersecurity awareness, it's really tough to overstate how important this is. But what we find in our experience is that it all starts from the top. And if the tone is set by the leadership of organizations that cybersecurity is important and that everybody plays a role in that, then it becomes important. And the opposite is true as well. If leaders sort of lead by example in ways that show that cybersecurity isn't important or it's somebody else's job, then it really doesn't become a priority. And those are the organizations that we find are most at risk. So the goal of this session, I think, is to give you guys that sort of perspective on cybersecurity and really the importance of shining that bright spotlight on this particular task as being something that we all share some responsibility for. So I'm super excited to dig into it today. We're really happy to welcome Sonia Goulet here today, first time instructor for us. We've had a chance to chat a little bit. Very impressed with Sonia's background. Just by way of introduction here, she's a cybersecurity strategist, trainer, and president of Infinity Cyber. She educates end users on all topics of cybersecurity awareness, focusing on improved alignment of technology, business, and people, and translates cybersecurity principles into everyday language that is easily understandable by all professionals. So we're really happy to have you here, Sonia. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that introduction. Welcome, everyone. I really appreciate you coming here today. This is going to be a very informative hour, going to make it worth your time, going to give you lots of information that will cover all the 5 W's, and you'll walk away with like what you can do in your business to actually address your security posture and increase your cyber hygiene. We will call it cyber hygiene. So today's agenda, we're going to go over what is cybersecurity, getting started with your business, your small, medium-sized business. What are the basics of it? What are the third-party security software and details around that? How you can have a security culture and how you can increase that and implement change management. And then also the remote work as a driver for in cybersecurity, because we have went to a large workforce that has been remote over the last couple of years and possibly is doing hybrid. So we want to address that for you on the security needs that you're going to have to consider today and in your long term. So what does security mean for business leaders? Let's start with just defining a few things for you, just so you know some of these common terms that are out in the industry, out in the news, and that kind of blend in with what your business is today. So your business now is no longer just the products you offer and the services you provide to your clients. You now have another level of business needs that you have to address, and that is security. We have security that has been on the back burner for years for a lot of businesses, small, medium, and large, because it was permitted. We could get away with it. We had brick and mortar. We ran everything in-house. We had paper pens, filing cabinets, and we had all ways of securing everything physically, easily, and with no questions asked, because you set up protocols, right? Locks on buildings, alarm systems, locks on cabinets. But now we've stretched our footprint. We have went to a digital footprint on a level that is unprecedented in the last couple of years, that made us shift remarkably fast to digital. Whether you were or were you not, if you were not, that's irrelevant. You were immediately put to a place where all your staff had to have access to digital files, email, accounts, software, the whole product line that your company would be offering in-house and for your clients. So that changes the landscape for you. You have to look at things differently now, because you needed ease of access to be able to provide services and products to all your clients with like no issues, no hangups, no delays. So you adapted. If you had a managed service provider, that was a little easier. If you didn't, you had a few things that were clunky where you had to add different third-party software services to be able to get up online to get your team working remotely with ease. So today we're going to talk about a few terms, security being one of them. So security is the ongoing assessment and proactive management of risk. So as you've done risk management for your brick and mortar and your physical services and products, that was easy to do. Now you have to do it on a different level, where you're looking at the data you touch, the data you transfer, but also the data your staff touch and the data your staff transfers, and where you store all of that data. So those are big concerns, and we're going to tell you why they're big concerns, because it isn't necessarily that everything you have for data is confidential, but you do have confidential data. So we want to bring to your attention what that means to you as a business owner now and a leader, where you're interacting with staff who touch different pieces of data that have way more value of confidentiality to your business and to your clients than ever before. So we have terms that we are having to become familiar with, called terms like data breach, What is that? That means a data loss. That means unauthorized access to your confidential data in your organization. Who's wanting to access this data besides your own staff? Various different outside sources. But today we're going to call them cyber criminals or hackers. And those are individuals or organizations that have malicious intent to steal your company data, confidential data, whether that's your financial records, your HR records, or just client records. Could be the whole gamut, or it could be piecemealed into different categories, depending on what's easier to access. And that's what we'll get into today, about where that data is stored, who's accessing it, and how secure are you keeping it. So we have other terms that are very relevant to you as well, and that's phishing. Phishing is now a new form of attack on an organization that is done as easily as a fake email sent to you or your staff, and a link in it that has a malware attached to that link. Then there's also other terms that have become popular as well, and that's called ransomware. So we'll discuss ransomware a little later, but that's another piece where that's a term you're going to have to get very comfortable with and understand the threat landscape that's going to apply to your organization. So regardless of the company size that you're in, these all apply to you. We are all connected in a different level now, globally, and that has changed our security measures because we now can log in anywhere in the world to access our own systems due to remote work. But that also means that the threat actors out there can also access your network with a little bit of, let's say, technical acumen, some hacker tools, we call it, and time and resources. So this means that your company isn't just for you and your staff, and the ease of access to get in and out of these systems is just for you. You have another perimeter that is now larger than your own organization. So your digital footprint is now transformed. Your hygiene has to be transformed because you're now in a digital era where everything you're going to be implementing or have already implemented has some kind of implication of it being online. And with that, you have to know now what are some of these interesting stats that are coming to our attention. Large organizations used to have a higher percentage of breaches, which meant data loss or, a data that was locked down. And now that's not the case. The case now is 58% of attacks are now being attacked on small and medium-sized businesses. So with that being said, that means you have become a target. But you're like, why? Why are you a target? Because of the ability to access your data. So we'll go into that a little bit more. An average of $141,000 is the cost of downtime if you have a data loss or your systems are down due to a breach. It takes an average of 206 days for a company to even recognize they've been breached. Now, cyber criminals are very sophisticated nowadays. Unfortunately, for us as business owners, it changes our level of understanding because we don't know what they're doing. We don't know how they're doing it. But at the end of the day, they have become sophisticated in their way to get into systems because of the access. So everything you want to learn online for good, you can also learn online for bad. All the tools that can be used for good can also be used for bad. So this translates into anyone with the wherewithal can access certain nefarious activities and apply that to anywhere they want to apply that. It could be any organization for any reason now. There doesn't actually have to be your reason. So gone are the days of bank robbers going into brick and mortar. It now has this level of the expertise is all over the map. the organized crime is all over the map, and the type of criminal that's going to attack your organization is all over the map. It could be a 17-year-old that just wants to hack into your system because he has access and the wherewithal to get access to these tools to do so. So it's really unfortunate, because I want to bring this to your attention to know that it's not experts who are part of an organized crime that can do this. It's a whole gamut of different types of threats out there that really have the same objective in mind, and is to shut your organization down. And one of the ways is to do it without you realizing it. So they have different methods to get into your system and then stay there. And when I say 206 days without you realizing there's something inside of your network and your systems that has malicious activities planned, that is exactly the case. Sometimes these hackers can go into a system and stay there on purpose. They call that APT, Advanced Persistent Threat. And that's where they can get a scope. And it's like someone sitting in your house closet, kind of watching who comes into the house and when they leave, and knowing activities and when things are quiet and when there's activity in the house. The same thing with your organization. These hackers have the ability to have different types of malicious malware, which is a software that has the intent to do damage to your server, your computers, or just your devices. They can sit in there and just essentially watch the network, and then they can grab whatever they want from your network. They can grab confidential data, they can take credentials, they can also just determine and access passwords through your Active Directory, all sorts of methods. I mean, it's really complicated, and that's what I want to do today. Is I want to take away some of that complicated aspect around cybersecurity and simplify it a bit for you today, so you can understand how it can apply to your organization, regardless of the complications of the threats out there. So what is very...
Sonia, let me just jump in here, because I think the last slide made some very, very important points. And most of the folks here on the call are clients, and the vast majority of our clients are somewhere between 20 employees and a few hundred. And you wouldn't believe how many times business leaders of those organizations think, oh, nobody cares about my company. I have 50 employees. Nobody's going to try to hack us. They're after the big fish. And, there's nothing that could be less true than that. In a lot of ways, that small to mid-sized business is a target because you're less protected, or that's what they think. And in many cases, they're right, is that you are less protected. And I think the other stat I think that is really important is that dwell time, that 206 days. So it used to be that you got malware, you got a virus, and that was it. You got a virus that happened today, and now something bad happened today. Well, that's really not the case anymore. And the ransomware is often, I don't want to steal your thunder if this is where you're going, but the ransomware can be the last thing that happens, and they can sit in your environment and kind of do what they want. And I'll tell you, there's one example that always stands out in my mind. We did some work for an organization over in New York State, some audit work, and they had a breach. And what they found was that the bad guys were within their environment for a year and a half, and they had set up a cryptocurrency mining operation using their server equipment. So, I mean, it's just, Sony's absolutely right. It just runs the gamut in terms of what the threats are and how creative the cyber criminals are.
Yeah, it's true. And it's unfortunate, because it means you have to become aware in a different way, the way you run your team, your software, your set up your data, where you transfer it. And so, and I really want to press upon you that unfortunately today, data is the new currency. And the reason data is the new currency, because it's easily traded. There is a value to sell your data on the dark web. So the dark web is a space where there's so much activity, lots of illegal activity, that is untraceable. So for you wouldn't think twice about it because you're not there. However, there's all sorts of different organizations that have popped up. They pop up and they get removed by Department of Justice or FBI because they're constantly tracked. But the problem is with the dark web is that most of the activities are not traceable. But what they have in the dark web is marketplaces. So just imagine Amazon, when you go on there and you're going to go buy some Christmas presents, or you're going to buy something you're going to restock for the house. Easy peasy, credit card press order, ship to, and you get it in a couple of days. Well, I'll be honest with you, the dark web is exactly the same format, except on a massive, large scale. And that scale allows these nefarious activities to take place under any kind of product need you would want. And it's unfortunate, but you can get fake passports, fake driver's license, you can get arms, you can drugs, credit cards. So like, for example, one marketplace that got taken down last year was called the White House, and they only sold credit cards. And so they sold them for a certain dollar amount, and you just go on there, buy one, and you're off and running. No one knows who you are, and no one knows who's selling you these, but they're just there as a kind of menu item. So credentials are there, the whole gamut. But what happens is now data, all sorts of data, is being pushed to this marketplace because of the value. And what's really valuable is credentials. Usually credentials are easier sold because of the access it can give them. So if they have an employee access, if they have creds from one of your employees or yourself, then they have access to your system. So it's just one of the easiest ways to get inside of your company, because credentials are like low-hanging fruit, right? So they send emails, because they can look on your website, they can see your company name, they can see your company email address, then they can go do some research on who works there, because usually we post images of who's, the leadership or who's on the team. So then they do a little due diligence and they double check who works where, and they get a little history. Unfortunately, because of our lifestyle, we have a lot of our information is posted online, whether it's social media, whether it's, LinkedIn, Facebook, our company websites. So if you just think for a second, what's put online about you and where you work, you'll be surprised at how easy it is to collect the basic information about you. And then that's set to be where a hacker could just set up a criminal. They call it, like, there's all sorts of names now that they use, but there's ransomware as a service, there's managed criminals as a service, because they now can do campaigns, and it's lucrative for them to do these campaigns. And these campaigns would start with, let's say, phishing, where they can send all of your staff an email because they already have your email addresses due to their reconnaissance on you and your staff. And then they send emails out. And as you've seen emails, the fake emails that come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, you would have seen one by now because they happen every day. And it just has fake information, but enough to convince you maybe to click on that link. And that's where they get leverage. You click on that link and they're off and running, and they're going to be able to get inside your network. So then what that means for you comes to this next header, and that's the ransomware piece. So ransomware is a threat that is becoming larger and larger as the days go. It's unfortunate, but it's because it's a lucrative way for cyber criminals to do business. The reason it's lucrative is because of the method in which they do this. So ransomware is that a hacker could get into your system through, like I said, stealing credentials and a staff member clicking on a link, and then they're inside your system. And what they do inside your system is, it varies every which way to Sunday. However, one of the methods is they will be inside your system and they'll lock your data. So they'll encrypt it, which means it scrambles it and you can no longer read it, or you can no longer access that data. And they'll send you some method of notification to say they are in your system, they've locked it down, and they have the key. And that's the only way to unencrypt your data or give you access back to your data. But they have that key, and they will only give it back to you unless you pay them a certain amount of money. Now, because these criminals are all sorts of organizations, all sizes, the amount they ask for is all over the map. There's no rhyme or reason to what they ask, and there's no rhyme or reason or how they're going to do this with you. So you are then put in a corner. Do you have your data backed up? Because that's what they're banking on. They're banking on, if I lock down your systems, I think I've got you in a lurch where you're going to actually have to pay me money to get your data back. So the question I ask you right now is, can you 100% right now tell me you have all of your data backed up securely, that if a cyber criminal went in and locked down your systems, you would be able to get back up and running within the hour or 2 hours? So it's a very valid question to ask, because what's happening now is, in the last year and a half, since our remote workforce has become very active, this has become the new threat due to ease of access. So that means your company no longer matters what size, it's the ease of access. So they do their reconnaissance, determine how they can get you, and they'll then determine how much they want from you. And some companies are susceptible and some companies aren't. But I'm going to tell you, millions and millions of dollars is being paid out in ransomware now. So much so that the Justice Department has launched a ransomware task force. The US government has deemed ransomware as a massive threat to its state. And there's different organizations involved to make sure that you do not pay ransomware. So you have to report a breach. If you get a ransomware attack that's notifying you they've locked down your system, you have to notify the law, and you will need their support, because they essentially don't want you to pay the ransom and they don't want you to negotiate with them. So lots of organizations do. And then there's also liability there. So the law is now coming into play where they're going to actually make you liable. If you pay the ransomware, you will be charged as a company. So the ramifications around this are so complicated, and I really don't want to overwhelm you too much, but I do want to make it clear to you that these are happening everywhere. So just to give you a couple examples, so the Steamship Authority of Massachusetts, they had a breach that happened in 2021, June 2nd. So that meant their online reservation systems were down for 10 days, and they couldn't do anything about it because of the way this breach occurred. So people had to phone in, and cancellations weren't done online. You couldn't book online. So obviously a disruption to the business, right? So 10 days downtime, that's a disruption to the business, big time. How much money was lost? It hasn't been revealed to us yet. That's the problem. We won't know. But as an organization, if you were down for 10 days and you couldn't do an ounce of business, what would that cost you? Or you could only do part of your business, what would that cost you? And then damage to reputation. This was all over the news that this Steamship Authority got breached. They had to put it on their website. They had to notify clients and customers and staff and the authorities. So it was out there for public knowledge, right? And then the expenses. So they had to get FBI involved to help them through this, because they were not going to pay the ransom, which most feel compelled to do because they're in a corner going, I have to pay it to get access. But they worked with the FBI and they were able to not pay the ransom. But because they immediately got the FBI involved, that's what saved them through this ordeal. They didn't negotiate directly with this group. So the group, now let's talk about the groups. The groups that do this, sometimes they come from very organized groups, and they do this as a group because they can collectively come together with different services. So when I mentioned ransomware as a service, that service means me as a hacker, I can know how to hack and break and crack passwords. So that's my specialty, for example. But what if I don't have the ability to encrypt data? Well, then I would hire a service on the dark web and get that service available to me. And I would hire a bunch of affiliates to do this with me to be able to launch this attack. There's malware that would be purchased, for example, specific malware to have a specific purpose. So this group would do this and they would launch this type of attack. So they weren't effective. They got shut down. But that's not always the case. Usually companies are are not able to just ignore this type of attack. They have to address it with FBI and get a lot of support. So the cost around this is undetermined, and I'm not even sure if they will reveal it, but I can guarantee you it was a lot of money. So that makes you think the cost of the post-attack was detrimental to them. They wouldn't have thought or suspected they were going to be a target, because they would think they have nothing worth being a target for. However, that is no longer the case. These hackers had a joyride shutting down these systems, all for the sake of just shutting them down. There's no rhyme or reason, like I said. So if you as an organization could start with that conversation of preventative actions for your organization to put in place, you could prevent the scale of this type of attack affecting your organization. So the type of security measures you need to put in place are going to be determined by you as a leader, what you want to implement and how you implement that with your team. I'm sure many of you heard about Colonial Pipelines. That was about 45% of East Coast fuel supply was shut down because of this type of attack. Colonial Pipelines didn't know initially how they breached their systems, so they had to shut down everything. And then they had to hire investigators, and they had to bring in FBI to help them figure out how to navigate this type of breach. And again, this is the new fear, is because all these industrial controls and are going online, and they're getting smart systems, and now they're vulnerable to these type of attacks. Now, this type of attack was done via legacy password and through a VPN system. So would you have thought that that would be the case? So you would ask yourself, where are all of my staff passwords, and especially old staff passwords, for example, those credentials? Logging those and retaining those could be problematic because there's vulnerabilities in your system that you may not be aware of. And if you don't have a full asset list and you understand where everything's stored, that could just wreak havoc for a hacker to be able to understand and just, they just want to poke holes. They like see where there's holes in a system. And as soon as they find it, then they do it just because they can as well. So very important.
Let me just interject a little sort of real world perspective here, Sonia. So what I will tell you is that in our experience, I wouldn't count on the FBI to come to your rescue. That is probably not going to happen. There's not much that the FBI can do, that I mean, nobody can unencrypt something. If your data is encrypted, the FBI can't unencrypt it for you. The other reality is there's so many of these attacks, and there's so many of these, ransomware incidents. It just, unless it reaches about $1 million, it's the number that we've heard, it's really hard to even get their interest. And it's not like you shouldn't report it. But what are they going to do for you? I wouldn't count on them doing much. And the problem is you can't really report it to the local authorities because it's well beyond their jurisdiction. So you're kind of stuck, and it's really on you. And Sonia is absolutely right. I mean, your backup is your first line of defense, 100%. But even that really can't protect you fully. I'll tell you the story of one of our peers, a company, a managed service provider down in Tennessee. One of their clients got encrypted. They got ransomware, and they had all the right protections. They had all the right backup. They restored the data, so they did it the right way. They actually recovered from this ransomware attack. But the problem was that the bad guys still had their data, right? So the fact that you're back up and running doesn't mean that your data isn't sort of out there in the wild. And so the insurance company, this client had good cyber insurance. The cyber insurance company negotiated with the bad guys to pay them a fee to delete that data. Now, I kind of rolled my eyes at the thought of that, because it's like, are you really going to trust these bad guys to delete this data? But apparently there's a bit of even a code of conduct of bad guys these days. And the insurance company trusted them enough to issue them a very big check to delete this very sensitive data. So it's just a complicated scenario. And, the FBI is not going to be your solution. Not that you should involve them, but just wanted to put that out there. And also, I'll also say, Sonia, that I have not heard of a law that says that companies are going to be penalized for paying ransom. If that's coming, I haven't heard of that. So that one's new to me.
Yeah, there's lots of things, like it seems to be every day there's new things coming down the pipe because of the magnitude of these type of attacks. And the problem is that at the end of the day, these attacks, you won't know when they come, and you don't know the scale of which they will come. And obviously there's lots of talk of different measures to put into place, like Al mentioned cyber insurance. That isn't the guarantee either, like not even close to the guarantee. Like I said, your measures have to be put up in place in the front so you can avoid it, the largest amount of risk, so that it's avoided at the end, because then you're at the mercy of criminals that have no scruples on how and what they're going to do to your data. Because at the end of the day, if they can sell your data on the dark web and then get money from your cyber insurance or you, they will do it. They will do both. Why would they not? You can't trust that they can. And the thing is I've seen enough breaches in the last year where these organizations who say, we paid the ransom, we trust and assume our data is safe, we got it back. They don't have the guarantee. There was never a guarantee. The hackers just said, we'll give you access back to your data. But why would you? You would just have to assume they're going to sell it. Why would you not, right? So then you go, okay, I'm a vulnerable organization now because now I don't know if my credentials actually have been sold, or if my data has been sold elsewhere, or it's just been leaked, right? So like Facebook had a leak last July of 550 million users. What did they do for you? Not a single thing. Where did it go? No idea. Who's liable? Nobody, because that's the scale of these type of attacks. Leaked. So you can look online, see that Facebook admits it got it leaked, and that's all you get. So we'll talk about that aspect around who's accountable and who's responsible, who pays, and what are the laws. But I just want to show you something really fun right now I find is a fun website, because I love tracking ransomware, for example. But there's this website called Information is Beautiful. And if you look at it, you will see the type of attacks that have happened over the last 5 or so years. So you will see in 2016, do you see my screen where it says 2016? Nothing, really little, right? Not much. And they'll show you, okay, what kind of a ransomware happened to MedStar Health? Well, no ransom. There's breaches in the past and type of data loss in the past, but not necessarily ransomware to the scale that it is this year. So as you see, as we move forward over the years, 2021 is just riddled with different types of attacks. Some are larger, some are smaller. So you just hover over them and you'll get a different details. JBS was a big one. It's a meat packing plant, as you would know. That was a big one. They had 11 million they had to pay out in ransomware. So I will share this link with you and you can just look at it yourself, because it's a really fascinating level of information, because then you can find out the latest breaches, what happened to them, what did they do about it, who was involved, and you can find out, in all honesty, the common problem here is not much gets to be done on the end of the criminal activity. If they find the criminal, which is rare because they're always exchanging wishing money via crypto, most of this is not traceable. So this brings us to the problem where who's accountable, right? And so we have laws in place, but not enough laws. And we have contractual obligations in place, but not enough. And we have due diligence. So ask yourself these questions, right? So what are you doing in an organization with the laws? So if you're in health, you follow HIPAA. So when it looks like you would follow HIPAA based on the fact that you have to by law, PCI compliance. You're using credit cards. If you have retail locations and you're using POS systems, you have to be PCI compliant. If you're not, there's different ways of checking those audits. The PCI compliance has a website where you can just do assessments, and you have to check those every 6 months. You have to assess yourself every 6 months. You can't do it once just because you get the system or once a year. It requires massive due diligence on your part to be just really preemptive about how are my systems, how secure are they, is everything in place the way it needs to be securely. We talk about ease of access, but now we have to talk about securing ease of access, right? So is it all your systems secure? The GDPR, right? So General Data Protection Regulations had implemented in 2018, changed the landscape of privacy laws across the world. And you as an organization, you may be liable if you do business globally. Microsoft, for example, is liable for that. And because they do business in Europe, they have to follow the GDPR law, and those regulations are very good, very comprehensive, and they really do protect the consumer. So a lot of US organizations have to implement GDPR, and that's great because you will see these things that we now just seem to be commonplace, right? I accept those cookies, I accept to opt in if I'm going to be on your website, or you can send me correspondence, I accept that. All various different methods of saying, I approve of you collecting information about me, and I'm giving you information about me that I give you authorization to keep, right? However, you still have to consider the fact that that's data that you as an organization, if you're keeping it, how are you keeping it? Where are you keeping it? So California has some crazy intense laws around consumer privacy, and in all honesty, if all of the US would follow them, I think we could be a lot more secure as a nation because of the laws that California has been very aggressively putting in place. So nothing compared to any other state though, like nothing. Most other states don't have as many laws as California. So when someone's gonna sue based on a privacy law, they're gonna sue from the state of California to like Delaware, for example, because they want to have those laws impact their litigation process for their rights. But definitely worth looking into for you as to, like, if you follow GDPR, getting a full understanding of what data you're collecting for your clients, and making sure you're not collecting too much, because you could be sued if you're collecting too much data if you ever had a breach. So the ramifications of that breach also fall into the lines of law. So contractual obligations, when you're doing third-party agreements with different software vendors, you're responsible for what you do with that software, like what information you keep. They're not responsible. So what the accountability piece of what data you put there, and what data what confidential data is there, all have to be considered in your day-to-day business transactions. And then, due diligence, as I mentioned. So let's talk about getting started with security in your business. So as I mentioned, cyber hygiene. It's a general practice. So there's different types of assessments you can take out there, different ways of getting aware of what you are doing and what you need to improve on. And that security posture is critical in your day-to-day business. And what you don't know is what you don't know. That's okay. But you can take steps by taking assessments and then understanding what you need, where the gaps are. And that's where you can reach out to your MSP provider, and they can really help you fill those gaps, because you can't do it alone. There's too much out there for you to be able to figure out on your own. And a lot of times you require outside expertise, right? And then just the way you're using the services also are very important, and making sure you're doing those securely. So you have to look at what support you're using, from what third-party vendors, and making sure that you have, there's service level agreements, contracts, making sure you really understand who's responsible for what. Because if they have a breach, like SolarWinds, where it was like a breach on software and a ton of companies were affected, who's responsible? What happens? Where's your data? What was compromised? You have these questions. Do you get the answers, right? So you have to know wherever your data is going, you are accountable for that data. So you really have to understand cybersecurity is a very multi-layered approach, and it's really important for you to implement certain steps to just do your part to make sure you have some risk, reduce your risk in your day-to-day business interactions. So for example, some of the basics we can cover is this training need. Your teams might not know what risks are out there. It's not necessarily their responsibility. They're just working hard for you. They're collecting the data they need. They're working on the data that they need to work through. But what are they doing with that data? How are they storing that data? Those questions, they don't maybe know, right? So taking an assessment, finding out, who has confidential data, who's touching that? Do they know that it's confidential data? Do they know to handle that with care? Or are they saving that data to their desktop and not to the shared server, shared drive, or to the proper cloud services that you've approved? Those are big questions, and they're really valid questions. And have you told them like what is actually required of them when it comes to storing their data, that data? It's a conversation worth having. So doing an assessment is an easy ask. So then they can just say, yeah, I share it on my desktop. I share it in the approved cloud provider services. You can find out some real honest, again, not making them feel like they're liable, but just getting an honest pulse of where they're at. Passwords, single sign-on is really easy and nice, but it's still a password. And password management is very difficult for the average end user, which is your staff or your clients. Very challenging. There's so many passwords to remember nowadays, and it's easy just to have the same passwords. So then what do you do about that? Do you have a password manager that you've implemented in your organization? Well, industry experts recommend that be one line of defense for your organization, that all of your staff have password managers so that they aren't using duplicate passwords for their Facebook account and into your Microsoft Office 365 accounts, because that's where the weakness can occur incredibly fast, is the similar passwords. So conversations like that can be had really easy, and then they could be fixed really easy. And then multi-factor authentication. We all use multi-factor authentication already. We just don't use it with every software we log into. So my ask to you is to consider asking and talking about that further, because that's another layer of defense that is critical, that just gives your company that extra protection, so that if there's an unauthorized user with unauthorized access, that MFA can really put that to a stop. And again, security professionals really recommend that as a really solid line of defense. Now, when we're talking about data, nothing is guaranteed, because everything is online, and that digital era that we're in, we are at risk just due to the fact that softwares have vulnerabilities. They have to be patched often. So there's different aspects around just the cost of doing business. But what you can do as an organization is all that you can do, and be accountable for the steps you can take. And these two methods, password managers, training, multi-factor authentication, they aren't costly in your business. They're just steps to take that take just a few seconds when it comes to when you log on to something and having MFA activated, just a few extra seconds of time. But when it comes to that, it's important for people to know how easy it is to do, right? So if you implement MFA in your organization, you can have different choices, right? You can have it via text, SMS sent to you. You can do something like fingerprinting. Like I like my laptop because I can just put my fingerprint there. And then you can have CAPTCHA. So there's different methods you've seen and used often. But the recommendation is to have all of your software that your team uses to have MFA implemented. So if you need more information about that, really important just to discuss that with your managed service provider. They really have a wealth of information, and they can support you implementing that. So it's not clunky, it's not challenging. You don't have to be the expert in this, but it's critical for all of the software and for your network. This would be just an easy win and an easy fix. Let's talk about third-party security. So you require a lot of different services that you don't provide yourself. So it's easy just to buy different, software, get different vendors, to be part of your business structure. So now you have to look at what do those SLAs look like, those contracts, and you have to reevaluate them. And MS Trust Center is an excellent resource for anything that you're unsure of. So for example, Microsoft will have information on GDPR, those regulatory laws and where they're obligated to follow. And then that applies to you. So it's just information that you could go to as a quick resource to find information. Now let's talk about that culture piece and change management piece. So when you're looking at your team, you, as Alan Wood said, you have to implement from the top. You have to tell your team that this is the change and the direction you want to go. Now, most people are very willing to. They just need information and they need training to understand the reason, right? So a really alarming stat is 88% of data breaches are occurring from uninformed employees. So you've hired a great team. They're the best at what they do. Unfortunately, they might not know what actual security risks are out there in the marketplace right now. And that's fair. It's really complicated. I have so many businesses and colleagues I work with that as soon as I start talking about cyber, they're like, they just tune out. And rightly so, because it's complicated and they don't understand the terminology. So I can imagine your teams are just as confused. So I would say the best way to nip that is to be able to help them by informing them, help them by guiding them, helping them by giving them direction, assuming they want to know and they'll do what they need to do as long as they learn how to do it properly. So we call it the Human Firewall. And that's where we say, okay, your staff could be your first line of defense because of the fact that cyber criminals know that your staff are also the low-hanging fruit and easy to get to. You can build up that defense by training them, sending them to training in a staggered fashion so that two staff attend cyber awareness training once a month, setting up training programs, setting up we call it a security champion, where you get one staff who's really competent, who can take this on and make sure all the teams are trained and that they understand these new initiatives. So if you're going to implement multi-factor authentication, they would know how to lead the teams to get the training in place. And they would be like, okay, all the team members are trained, everyone's ready, and then you can implement the new, a new initiative. Good policies are critical, really important. So if you aren't sure if you have that in place, same thing. A managed service provider can really help you, go over that checklist of what policies you need, and then how to give those to your team so they can understand how to manage passwords, how to manage the data they're touching with your organization, where they're transferring it, how they're storing it. And then more than anything, just start the conversation with your team. The next team meeting, do a round table and just get a pulse on how to get their feedback, whatever it takes. I mean, you want to make this as unthreatening as possible, but be aware that they're not going to know. Most people honestly do not understand that threat landscape. They don't understand how much they are a target. They just don't. And so you have to have some understanding that you're all in this together and you're going to be a leader and you're going to help everyone kind of move the needle to adapt accordingly. Just like we did the last couple of years, we moved accordingly and we went remote and we did that. Most of your team was really adept with that. Same thing. We have to move the needle and we have to change our security posture. We have to change our mentality and we have to be aware that we have to shift based on the landscape that we're in today. And I get it. There's some staff that won't be able to understand this very well, but that's where you come in and you just be that leader and you effectively manage this with, a plan of action, right? That book, Who Moved My Cheese, is a really good book. And they talk about change management. They also help you understand the different mentalities around staff who would struggle with that change. Recommend, go on YouTube, look at the overview, go look up online if you haven't read the book, but it does talk about the challenges you could encounter and how you would implement that to create the least amount of pain points possible, right? Because you're going to have some people resistant to that change, but if you give them enough reason and, care enough to help them through that, they could catch up and be part of that change for the new training and new initiatives that you put in place. And the MSP providers provide also training, what you call a dashboard, sorry. And it's a really interesting dashboard. And Alan, you could talk a bit more about this if you wish, because this is your dashboard and you have a really high score. And this is a good score. As you could see, the marker 0 to 499 is a low score, and 630 to 800 is a high score. And so that's the kind of dashboard you want to be able to see for your team, so you can say, okay, where's their training? Where's their level of understanding? Right, Alan?
Yep, no, that's right. Absolutely. And if you're a client, hopefully this dashboard is familiar to all of you. I know we're kind of running short on time, so I'm not going to dig too much into this, but the point is that you have to really be measuring the success of the training that you're doing, and dashboards help you do that.
It does. And so then just one last thing, when it talk about the remote working, we have a checklist. And so you can get this checklist from us after, and just to make sure you have these in place. And if you don't understand them, that's again where you can get outside source of help to help your teams implement them, because these are really important to have the secure workstations at individuals' homes. They may be using multiple devices. Are they all permitted? You know, where are they saving data on multiple devices? Is that permitted? So just again, having that conversation in the boardroom or just the team meeting, just discussing these openly, doing a questionnaire, whatever it takes, but just asking them, hey, has any of you implemented these 10 points? If not, do you need help? And then helping them. And, you know, even if it's one aspect they're missing, that's important for them to know. They can come and say, well, I don't know how to set up my Wi-Fi securely. All right, we'll show you how. I don't know how to set up and change my router password. Okay, we'll help you do that. These are little steps, don't take much time, but they're steps that are critical for a secure home office. So we can give you that list, and then you can get some outside support for implementation of that. And then our calls to actions today are just to start the conversation, you know, get the assessments from us, fill them out, get your team to fill them out, and then start that conversation. And then once you do, you can get, you know, a security champion, get them to be your leader and head this up for you. And just start with one thing, just one. You don't have to do all of this, but now that you know, decide what it is that you would want to start to implement and do that one thing, right? Because you're accountable. At the end of the day, you are accountable to protecting your organization. And it's unfortunate that this is another layer, but I believe that we can adapt accordingly to create a secure organization with just a few of these new initiatives that you put in place. And it's an ongoing need, unfortunately. It's a really big need, but it's an ongoing need. It constantly changes, and that's where we have to change. And so this is why we're here for you, giving you these sessions that are informative, they're current, they give you a kind of a understanding of what's out there, what's really going on in the industry, in the marketplace. And if you bring your teams to the training, then they can get a level of understanding to figure out what's really happening and how it applies to them. So I really appreciate having you here today. I really think it was a great session for you. And if you have other questions, we'd love to answer them. You can reach out to us after. Also, Alan is here to be able to answer any of your questions as well.
I think we actually have a couple more minutes here. If people have questions, go ahead and type them into the Q&A box. And while you're doing that, if you have any questions, I just want to give you my take on where things are with security, because it's a big deal. And Sonia's right that the landscape has changed so dramatically over the past 2 or 3 years. You know, the things that we're having to think about are much different today than they were even then. And so, you know, as a managed service provider, we're responsible for the IT operations of all of our clients. I mean, that represents thousands of users, many, many different companies. And so, you know, we all as MSPs have to decide, like, what's our security posture going to be for each of our clients? And, you know, it needs to be something that, you know, is proven to be effective and is something we can implement across a wide client base. Is going to really just work for people. And, you know, you kind of divide the layers up into different kind of categories. And, you know, the first layer, and it's the one that most people are familiar with, is keeping the bad guys out. You know, it's antivirus. It's like, okay, I've got this piece of software, it runs on my computer, and it's going to detect any bad thing and keep it out the door. Well, we all know that that is not 100% effective. And so you need to have that, but it's just not nearly enough. And so the industry has really evolved past antivirus. And so, one of the things that we have to decide is, what does that look like? And so there's a category of software these days called endpoint detection and response, EDR software, which is sort of a smart antivirus that has the ability to stop attacks in process, has the ability to do some more advanced features in terms of the ability to recover and shut off access to other parts of your environment. So that becomes part of that, keeping the bad guys out the door. The other part is what they call threat hunting, which is, okay, they got inside your house. Now they're here. They're sitting there for 206 days. They're mining cryptocurrency on my servers, and I don't know it. So that is really referred to as threat hunting. So, the first is the lock on the door. That's your EDR antivirus. The second is they're in here and we don't know about it. So that's the threat hunting piece of it. And even that isn't really enough. And so there's another methodology that I think is really worth thinking about, and it hasn't been talked about enough, in my opinion. And it's something called zero trust. And the idea here is that everything else is trying to keep the bad guys out, which is just this giant game of technology whack-a-mole, and it just takes one to slip through, and then you're kind of sunk. And there's this phrase in our industry these days called assume breach, which is that you're going to assume that at some point you're going to be breached. And we don't love that idea, and nobody loves that idea. So the idea of zero trust is it really turns the whole security platform kind of on its head. So instead of saying, okay, I'm going to look for the bad guys, we're going to just identify the things that we know are good, and we're going to only run them. And we're not going to run anything else in our environment, only things that we know are good. And so we think that this category of software is just a game changer. And we're doing our due diligence on a couple different options these days, but and not to say that that's all you'd have, but you'd have a zero trust platform which says, okay, it's only these 75 different things that we run. And anything else is an exception, and we need to get approval to run those. And we're still looking for the bad guys knocking on our door, but in theory, none of them should really get in the door, because you're not obviously going to whitelist your viruses and your malware software. So we think that this is really going to be a game-changing approach for a lot of companies. I don't know why it hasn't gotten more attention. I think this is obviously the better option of just trying to be a hockey goalie and keep all the pucks out of your net, which is not wildly effective. So we think that this is really going to pick up steam in 2022. It's probably going to be built into our managed service offering. By the end of 2022, we'll be moving to some of this kind of more advanced security level stuff. But I'll tell you, it's been a year of really trying to decide how we want to approach this. And we're very involved in our industry and our peer community, and we're all struggling with it. We're all trying to decide what's the best approach for our clients. How do we protect our clients? Because a breach for you is it's bad for us. It's bad for everybody, and that's the nature of the relationship. So just a couple of things to think about. I don't know if there are any questions. Don't really see any here. So anyway, Sonia, thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here. That was very, very useful. And we hope to have you back. And thanks everybody for being here. We'll send out that survey coming up, and look on our website. I know we probably had a slide or two talking about some upcoming sessions, but you'll get emails, or you could pop on our website. We've got a whole course list of things coming up. We've got a couple webinars a month these days. So so check them out. They're all free. They're all really geared towards clients. We want these to be learning, interactive. So join us. All right. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.